India's first homemade aircraft carrier was in the news this week. It is called INS Vikrant. A naval variant of India's Tejas Light Combat Aircraft landed on this carrier. It was a milestone for the Indian Navy. It brings the carrier one step closer to becoming fully operational. Meanwhile, India's other aircraft carrier, the INS Vikramaditya, is expected to be back in action soon. So by the end of this year, India should have 2 battle-ready aircraft carriers patrolling the seas. And this is very significant for India to project its military might in the Indo-Pacific. Our next report explains what this means for India and the region. The Tejas has landed. In a landmark moment for the Indian Navy, a combat aircraft landed on a made-in-India aircraft carrier, the INS Vikrant. And the cherry on the top? The Tejas Light Combat Aircraft was also indigenously built. It's a big boost to Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative and a shot in the arm for the Indian Navy. The INS Vikrant is still undergoing trials. It is expected to become fully operational by the end of this year. India has 2 aircraft carriers, the INS Vikrant and the INS Vikramaditya. INS Vikrant is homemade, designed and built in India. INS Vikramaditya was bought from Russia, a former Soviet carrier which India commissioned in 2013. It has been out of action for the last 2 years, undergoing repairs. Once both of them are ready, India will have 2 aircraft carriers patrolling the seas. Why do we need 2? Because the threat from China is rising. China has been very aggressive in the neighborhood. It is building facilities in the Indian Ocean, putting together what's come to be called the string of pearls. It's a string of military bases that encircle India and give China vantage points in the region. China's first overseas base was in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. Then it got Hambantota in Sri Lanka and Gwadar in Pakistan, among others. Beijing is also modernizing its navy. It has the world's largest fleet. China is building what's known as a blue water navy. What's a blue water navy? One that can operate across the world, that can mobilize quickly using bases in every region. The Indian Ocean is on China's target, which is why the Indian Navy needs to be prepared. China has been using its navy to throw its weight around. It did this with Taiwan, constant live fire drills and incursions to build pressure on Taipei. China uses gunboat diplomacy to settle disputes. It has disputes with most of its neighbors on who owns which islands. China is at loggerheads with Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. It uses its navy to intimidate all these countries. Last year, India objected when a Chinese ship docked in Sri Lanka. India said it was a spy ship. China denied the charge and proceeded to dock the ship at Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. This is a port Colombo has leased to Beijing for 99 years. China has 3 aircraft carriers. Though it hasn't sent any to the Indian Ocean yet, it is expected to do so in the next few years. Ties between India and China have been at historic lows since 2020, with China trying to push its troops into Indian territory in the Himalayas. India needs to calibrate its defenses to keep an aggressive China in check, and a key part of that is keeping the Indian Ocean safe. India is part of the Quad grouping with the US, Australia, and Japan to push back against Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. While the other 3 nations will keep China at bay in the Indo-Pacific, it'll fall upon India to guard the Indian Ocean. And that's where the 2 aircraft carriers become essential. INS Vikramaditya has historically kept an eye on Pakistan in the Arabian Sea. Now the Bay of Bengal and waters around Sri Lanka need to be patrolled too. With the 2 carriers operating simultaneously, the Indian Navy will be better equipped to project its military might.